I'm going to now move on, and I have the lovely Sophia. I think she's going to join us, and Sophia is going to be hosting a panel, I believe. Hey, Sophia, should we get everybody on and let you do the? Hey, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. You?
Not bad, not bad. Always enjoying the big indie pitch with you yesterday.
Thank
That was
you.
great fun. Always entertaining. If you haven't done a big indie pitch, by the way, Sphere organizes and runs that. It's an amazing experience for a game developer to get in front of a whole bunch of crazy people like me, who will then be really vindictive about your game. Give you good feedback, and great fun. And hey, Jana. So I will hand over to you and let you continue and introduce your team, and I'll leave you to it.
Thank you. Thanks, Oscar. Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant to be a part of the Incredible Indies track and to be back on stage again. Obviously, to introduce myself to everyone who may not have seen me the last 2 days or may not have been part of the pitch. My name is Sophia Aubrey-Drake. I'm one of Steel Media Pocket Gamers presenters, and my main role is in running the Big Indie Pitch, a celebration of indie developers. And it's lovely to see so many people experienced in the indie development scene here with us today. Before I let all of them introduce themselves, though, I do want to say, of course, whilst this is a panel that I'll be asking the questions at first, we want all your questions as well for the end. So please do keep the chat going in the chat and drop your questions into the Q&A, because I'll be going through them as the panel goes along, and especially at the end. But of course, it's not all about me. It's about all of the lovely people I see in front of me. So I'm going to come to you just as you are on my screen. Zoom always does it in an odd order. But yeah, when I call on you, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and then we'll get into the panel. But yeah, first up, we've got Jana. Do you want to introduce yourself for everyone?
Sure. My name is Jana Bdour. I'm 14 years old, soon to be 15, from Jordan. I'm a Unity game developer and co-founder of Sakura Games, a startup where we develop edutainment games to make education more interactive and fun. And we have been a part of the Pocket Gamer Connect for the last 3 years, and it has been a great journey. Thank you for having us, or having me this time.
No, thank you for being here. It's just amazing that someone half my age is here. It makes me feel very old, but I think that's very exciting for the whole industry. Next up, we've got Mark. Do you want to introduce yourself for everyone?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm Mark Backler. I'm the founder of Sketchbook Games. We're developing a platformer game set inside the pages of a diary called Lost Words Beyond the Page. We're no strangers to the Big Indie Pitch or Pocket Gamer. And I've previously worked at companies like EA and Lionhead on games like Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix and Fable 2.
Fantastic. And next up, I've got Christopher on my screen.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Chris. I've been making games. I shipped my first game in 1992. So I've been making games for a while. I've been running a studio called Boomzap Entertainment for the last 16 years. We're an indie game developer, totally virtual office. We make a variety of casual games. Most of our studio is in Pacific Rim, Asia. I'm in Japan. We've got people in Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, a bunch of places like that. So yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. And last but not least.
Hi, I'm Liviu. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Altergaze. We are a small boutique studio. We work a lot with advertising with big brands from all over the world. And over the last 3 years, we've been slowly dipping our feet in the game development, with our first title being a 5v5 competitive shooter.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, like I say, a brilliant panel, and I'm really excited to dive into it. I know everyone watching probably knows this, but, our panel is going to focus on just a lot of the realities and maybe challenges that indie developers should really have in the back of their mind at the moment. not just in terms of, obviously, a lot of people might think when I say at the moment we think COVID, but obviously we just mean in general, the way the market's moving and shifting, and what challenges, but also what opportunities are there at the moment. So let's dive right in at the deep end, and I'll start, I suppose, with Liviu. Ask your opinions first, since you were last up then. But yeah, how competitive do you think the indie scene is right now?
Well, I mean, I think right now the entire games industry has become like to a different level of competitiveness, right? Because when you take out all the big conferences and daily public transport and so on, I think a lot of people are now competing in the same online space of Google ads and Facebook ads, basically, and influencer marketing. So yeah, from our perspective, I mean, yeah, it's tough. The reality is it's tough.
Yeah, does everyone else here think it's tough? I mean, we've got people in different regions. Is it the same sort of? Are you everyone experiencing different challenges at the moment? I mean, Christopher, you've obviously got a global team. Is that are you also finding that it's extremely competitive at the moment, the scene?
I don't know. I guess I have a lot of perspective on this.
Yeah.
The industry has gone through many changes. It's going through changes now. I could go 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and at each one of those conferences, people would say, "Oh my God, it's harder than it's ever been." It's always hard, and being an indie is always going to be hard. The finances are always going to be hard. Marketing your game against EA and Tencent and Rovio is always going to be hard, and none of this changes. So yeah, I mean, it's hard, but I guess I don't find it particularly harder than it was 15 years ago. I will say there are some pretty big movements in the game industry that are positive, in my opinion. One of those has been the rise of, I would call it, the indie publisher. If we're looking at Devolver, Raw Fury, Tiny Build, these are all, I know these people, they're good people, and they're filling a niche that hasn't been filled in the last 5 years, of somebody that can come in and finance a game at the $50,000 to $250,000 level. You can't go to EA and ask for $200,000. That's not even a conversation you can have with them. That's not even money to them. So the rise of these sort of indie publishers that are, largely somebody who had a successful game and now they've got money and they're looking for a way to reinvestment, that's been exciting, to be quite honest. I'll also say that this new round of acquisitions, everybody's getting bought right now. I don't know where all this money in Scandinavia came from, but if you're not getting bought by a Scandinavian company right now, you're nobody. That's also pretty exciting. So, yeah, it's hard, but there's also good stuff happening right now. So I don't know. I would say it's a game industry. It's always weird.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, Jana, do you want to add anything to this? What challenges are you seeing at the moment, or or do you not think it's as competitive? I mean, let's start with you, Mark. I mean, you've obviously taken a lot of varying opportunities and explored, new things in the market at the moment, along with the established. How are you finding the scene at the moment?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two answers in that. Like, it's not necessarily direct competition against other people, and you're all making different things. And if you can find your interesting niche and make sure your game is different, then yeah, it doesn't seem like the kind of competition is such an issue. But then on the other hand, yeah, there are more games being released than ever, and it does sound like quite a few years ago there was a golden age when you could just get your game out on Steam and you'd sell 100,000 copies plus just for being a game on Steam. And now yeah, there's loads of games that aren't selling at all, and so marketing and raising awareness about your game is kind of more important than ever. And it's always getting harder and harder to do, but yeah, hopefully just by making sure your game is standing out in as many different aspects as possible, and you're kind of putting in as much work and creativity into raising awareness about it as you do to actually developing it, then I think there's still lots of opportunities, and yeah, lots of games are sort of managing to stand there.
Yeah, and Jana, you're in a really interesting position because a lot of the other developers have talked about, you know, how the scene has grown and evolved. But as someone, you know, so young and just coming into it, and especially in a really brand new emerging market, how are you finding it at the moment? Are you finding it a challenging scene, being an indie developer?
Well, I think that it's very, very competitive. For even forgetting about the big companies, there are some really great indies that are making games better than many big companies. So it's getting more competitive by the moment, but also it's a huge market. So uh, there are many great games, but there are many publishers who will be interested in your games. So you do have a chance after all. But
Yeah.
it's tough. It's really tough to get your game out there.
Yeah, I mean, and I sticking with you, Janet. I mean, I think one thing that's really interesting in terms of what you guys have done is, I mean, the next question I was going to ask is all about whether it's important to follow your passions or should indies always be looking at the market? And I suppose in your case, you developed a game that looks at, you know, female mechanics and helping, you know, not just following a passion, but also passing a great message on. So what's your opinion on that? Do you think it's important to follow a passion, or do you think you should basically be more looking at where the market is?
Well, we struggled with this very, very much because when we started in the field, we were like we wanted to follow our passion, and that's what we did. We started creating games that fit with what we like, and we weren't really into the kind of games that were trending and that are trending right now. But we realized that even though trendy games are based on really weird mechanics and shiny colors, they do work better than when you follow your passion. So if you want to follow your passion, you have to make sure that you have a stable income to back you up. You can't just follow it without anything. But we do believe that even if you don't have a stable income, if you work hard enough and create an original and creative idea, you can create a trend that other devs can start following. But it's really tough to balance between following your passion and following the trend to and generating revenue in the end.
Yeah, I mean, does anyone else have anything to add on that? Do you think it is? Yeah, Christopher, I can see you're there. Yeah,
I would actually argue that the question is a little misleading. The fight between, you know, should you do what you love or should you do what the market says to do? I think there's a third path, and that is you need to have a long-term plan for your studio, right? When you're putting together your studio and you're saying this is what we want to do with our studio, you can't always just be thinking about this game. You have to be thinking about, where do I want the studio to go in 2 years? Where do I want it to go in 5 years? Do I want to exit in 5 years? Do I want to, you know, how am I building an audience, not just for this game, but for the next game? And so if you're, you know, look and you take that sort of rough framework and then you add in, there are going to be opportunities that you couldn't have thought of. You know, if you're always saying, I want to do this thing that I've always wanted to do, that's a very narrow path, right? There are other things that maybe the market is, you know, you're not saying, oh, this is what the market is doing, so I have to do that. But you go to a conference like Pocket Gamer and you meet the right person, and the right person has an opportunity that you wouldn't have dreamed of. And you say, well, that's an interesting opportunity. And the question is, does that opportunity fit within the structure of what you're trying to do long-term with your studio? And that may not be exactly what you planned. It may not be exactly your passion, but maybe it gets you the money that you need to do the thing that you want to do, or maybe that brings you to the audience, or maybe that gets you a relationship with a publisher. I think the real key is to have some sort of framework for your studio of what it is you're trying to do. And then within that framework, to be very flexible and very open, because it's a big industry and there's a lot of stuff happening in this industry. And if you're constantly just focused on this one thing, you're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities of working with other people. That would be my suggestion over time.
Yeah, Mark, Liviu, anything you want to add to this?
I guess last words was sort of just the kind of project that we were interested in playing to begin with, and we didn't really look at the market or anything. Then for our next projects, we have been listening to all of the good advice from everyone, and interested in I guess trying to do both of find something that it makes good business sense, and there's definitely an audience there, but also is something that we're really passionate about working on. And yeah, with Bdour as well, the jury is still out. Like, it's had a good critical reception so far, and people seem to like it. But we've just been on Stadia at the moment, and we're only releasing on Steam and consoles in the next few months. And so yeah, we'll see how well or not the strategy of sort of just starting off and focusing on something that was a passion project will work out. But it did evolve over the years, and we play tested it a lot, and we always tried to make sure that we were taking lots of feedback on board, and so it did sort of get steered and guided and evolved quite a lot over the years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. Basically, find something that's trending that you're passionate about. And also, like, failing fast is definitely like your friend. Like, we went through 4, 5, 6 ideas that we tested out before we ended up with the project that we've been working on for 3 years. So, iterating fast and putting it out there and see the first reaction. You can at least figure out, is there a market, or is the market reacting to it the way I'm imagining it to react to it? Or is there just a passion project and there's no one that cares about it apart from you? So there's a learning curve to that. And the faster you can iterate and fail, the faster you're going to find that project that fits within a trend and that you're passionate enough to pursue it all the way to the end.
Yeah.
I'd like to add something to that. I think he said something very important, which is get to that failure very quickly. I think one of the biggest mistakes I see young indies having is they're doing something that clearly doesn't work, and they just keep bashing their face into this thing that clearly doesn't work. You need to be able to recognize your failure, even if it's something that you really love or something you really believe in. If you've gone out and tested it and you have no traction and you have no audience and people aren't into the thing that you're doing, giving up is not a shameful thing. Moving on to something else. Failing is part of being successful. And I see a lot of young indies just bash their head into the same idea for a really long time and throw away years of their lives and throw away a lot of money on something that obviously was never going to work in the first place. That doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean you quit, but it does mean you stop doing that thing that doesn't work.
Yeah, there's yeah, I mean, absolutely great points there. I mean, it's something we actually say a lot in the feedback for the Big Indie Pitch is, take the things that aren't working, learn from them, grow, and maybe some games it's get it released, move on to the next game with the learnings, a lot of stuff like that. One thing I do think, which is a hot topic, and it's actually something we've already brought up here in the, at the start of this panel is, right now, do you think there is still is self-publishing still a really good option for indies, or do you think having a publisher or an investor is kind of more important than it's ever been right now in the market? And also, when we look at publisher and investor, I mean, who is it that should be going for an investor, and who is it that maybe should be looking at a publisher? I mean, does anyone want to kick us off here about, whether self-publishing's still a strong move?
I can jump in because we struggled with this for 3 years now. Basically, I guess self-publishing is still an option as long as you remember that sooner or later you're going to need money for advertising. Like, at one point you're going to get hit by that. As long as you found a solution for that, if you're self-sustainable or you found a way to engage into a wide audience all at once, that is going to buy your game through collaboration, through whatever works for you. Maybe you have a YouTube channel, whatever you figure out for yourself. Maybe you can jump without a publisher or an investor, but there's definitely we definitely went through like all the free options for us, like because our company we've been working in CG for over 15 years, so we know our way around the market of entertainment, not games per se, but how entertainment is funded and so on. So publishing is definitely the option if you don't want to deal with any of the bureaucracy. Because even if you just want to get an investor and you know how to market your game and know how to do advertising, if you're not willing or you don't have the patience of doing all the legal paperwork just to be able to be validated by the government to get investment, then your publisher is the better route for money if you need money. If you're willing to like grow and you know your way around advertising, no publisher will know how to sell your game as good as you. I think that's the one thing that a lot of the people, when I say, well, the publisher, a lot of indie studios that tell horror stories, is basically, the fact that you are never going to like how a publisher is going to promote your game, because you will probably think that you'll do it differently. And then, as I said, the option of self-publishing is a valid one, as long as you have some form of financial stability or a way of funding the advertising segment of your game that you are going to hit sooner or later, right?
Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in? Any insights on this?
Yes, for us, we wanted to work with a publisher, and like for our first projects, at least, and then we can, I guess we'll see for future projects. But we're still interested in working with different publishers. I think at some point it would be nice to self-publish, like when you've got the war chest to allow you to hire your own PR companies and QA outsourcers and all the other bits and pieces that you otherwise would be relying on a publisher for. And someone who's just got already built up a big network and has the connections and the platform holder relationships. And then when we're more proven and we've maybe released another game or two, then we'll probably look to try self-publishing. I think it's good that the opportunity is there, and there's some indies that they build the following and get funding from different sources and decide to go it alone, and it's can work out really well. But then I think also there's a lot to be said for the sort of experience and support that publishers bring.
Yeah, Christopher, so you came on as well.
I'd argue that you need to look very seriously at what it is you actually think you're going to get from a publisher. I think a lot of indies make the mistake of thinking, I don't know what I'm doing, so I need a publisher. And they assume that that's just going to fix it. And quite honestly, I would say it's probably less useful to get a publisher now than it's ever been, because publishers have become extremely risk adverse. Mobile has done this to us. Mobile games have reached a point now where if you go to a publisher, the publisher says, oh, well, what are your KPIs, right? And they want to know, hey, is your game cash positive already? Well, screw you, publisher. If my game is already cash positive, what are you doing in this equation, right? I took all the risk up front. I got the game. I got the KPIs. At this point, and they're at PG Connects. You can go talk to them. There's 5 or 6 different organizations that are just investors for UA, right? You can go if you can go to them and say, look, here's my KPIs. This thing is cash positive. If you put, $100,000 into this game, it will generate $500,000. They will give you that money. That's a doable thing right now. And so going to a publisher who says, oh yeah, we can give you money for user acquisition. Where do you think they're going for the money? They're going to the same people you would go. You go to a publisher and they say, oh, well, we can do your PR for you. They don't have PR companies. They go to the same PR people that you would go to, right? In my opinion, the only legitimate reason for a publisher in today's day and age is that they're going to fund your development. If they're going to come in and they're going to put in the risk of helping you fund your development, then great, you get to have a piece of the pie. But if you're not willing to do that as a publisher, I have serious questions about what is your role in this? Because all of the rest of it, it used to be that a publisher was the people that could get you in the Walmart, to get you in the Best Buy. That's not a thing anymore. I can get on Steam, right? I can get on the App Store. That's not hard to do, right? Anyone could do that, right? It used to be that they would provide PR and all this other. There are PR companies that do that. There are companies that will loan you the money for user acquisition. Everything that a publisher does, someone else out there will do if you pay them to do it. And so if you have to get to the point where you already have a near final product that you already know is going to be cash positive, there is no role for a publisher in that deal anymore, because you already know that you're willing. If your game is a good game and you're making money in early access, I'm willing to put my own money down for marketing and PR. If I've got a mobile game that's already got the KPIs to be cash positive, I'm willing to go buy my own user acquisition. And importantly, getting back to my earlier point, this is a mistake that I learned the hard way. Boomzap's a 16-year-old studio, and I spent most of those 16 years working with publishers. Now, I made a lot of money doing that because I forced all those publishers to pay for my development. That's fine, but 16 years later, I don't own a lot of intellectual property. And so here we are in this great big explosion of people buying studios. Nobody wants to buy my studio because I don't own any intellectual property that they can buy. What would you buy if you buy my studio, right? Your job as a developer is to develop intellectual property that you own. And every time you go to a publisher, they're going to want to take that from you. And I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying they got to pay for that. The only reason they get that IP is because they paid for your development and they took that risk. If they did that thing, by all means, that's a way that you can run a studio. I've made a lot of money running a studio like that. But I see these young indies that, they get all the way to a pretty good looking game and they're like, we don't know what to do here. Let's go get a publisher. And that's, every time I see it, I'm very sad. It's a real waste. And there are very bad people out there that will take advantage of those people. There are publishers out there that take advantage of those indies every day. And I hate them, to be quite honest.
Okay, and just to round off and give Jana an opportunity, I know you've worked with a publisher recently to help craft your game. For you guys starting out, was that a valuable experience?
Well, it was a learning opportunity, of course, but it was different because they were more of a partner than a publisher, and Martin helped us with the game design document, of course, so it was different. I can't say they were just a publisher, but yeah, it was a great learning opportunity. We learned about cars as well, about basic car maintenance. But I do agree with what Christopher said on some points. So if the publisher is not willing to fund the development, then they have no right to own the IP rights. But sometimes they can. Sometimes if you don't have any money to invest in the game, in the marketing of the game, you would need a publisher actually. So that's another point to add.
Yeah, and I know, like you said, Martine is one of our regular judges and a close friend of the Big Indie Pitch and of the show. You probably see her presenting and moderating. So yeah, like you say, in that case, it's a little bit like what Christopher was talking about as well, is that's more like a dual creation point where they're investing and inputting into the whole development process. So, really nice to hear about that.
I just want to point out, Martine is actually a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
She's the exception, right?
Yeah,
she's an exception.
I would hate to be like, well, Martine is cool, so publishers are cool. That's not a true statement. The true statement here is she's cool, right? There are cool publishers. She's one of them.
Yeah.
She is not the rule.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, a great shout out for Martine. She very much deserves it. But, again, I heard something else there touched upon by Jana that Liviu touched upon, that I think everyone's touched upon at some point, which is about the marketing side of things and the promotion. And that's become more and more challenging, I suppose, as or maybe there's new opportunities. That's the kind of thing I want to delve into in terms of YouTubers, Twitch, but then you've also got the established media that are facing their own challenges right now. Is that the most difficult part of self-publishing, or just being an indie? Is it gaining that traction and coverage? Or do you think that there are other challenges greater than it? For example, getting your game onto stores or whatever. Let's start with you, Mark. Do you think the marketing side of things is possibly the biggest challenge at the moment to being an indie?
I guess it depends on your skill sets and what you like doing and what you're good at, because some people take to it really naturally and other people not so much. And like for me, there's some areas I think I've done a pretty decent job at. Like we've got a good Twitter following, but then when it comes to like our Discord, I've seen other indies who've done a much better job of nurturing a good community on theirs. Our Discord is pretty quiet, and I've not really got around to doing a whole bunch of the other things to kind of encourage that to be more active. Yeah, I've been putting some effort into trying to like choose which events to focus on to help us build our Steam wish lists, and sort of looking into a lot of that and the discoverability side of things. The game discoverability newsletter is really good for that. It's definitely worth signing up to. Simon Carnis's email, and yeah, so I think it definitely can be tricky though, and looking into the details of it, there's lots of sides of things that I'm not that good at. So yeah, sometimes it can be definitely beneficial to make sure you're working with the right people or agencies or freelancers to sort of help out. And yeah, for us, that's one of the areas when a publisher has been really great of sort of supporting us with raising awareness about the game. Like we recently released a video of the orchestra recording session for the soundtrack for Lost Words, and Modus, our publisher, got it featured on the PlayStation and Xbox YouTube channels, and I wouldn't have known, you know, how to go about doing that, and still don't. And so yeah, you know, they've got that relationship and were able to get those featurings, which then got a lot more views than otherwise it would have done.
I suppose part of that is, you know, there's twofold to that. There's obviously the networking, the connections, you know, not just some people might have better connections, but obviously it's part of a process. It's part of a learning curve and growing them and gaining those connections. But I suppose there is also a point of it depends how big your team is. Is it just you on your own? Is it 3 of you? I mean, you know, how much stuff can one person do in a day whilst also developing, you know, a full game? I mean, Liviu, do you have any insights on this? I know for you guys, it's vitally important to your game to have the correct sort of, you know, attention, especially in the streaming sectors.
Yeah, so I mean, as Mark said, it depends on what your skill sets are, right? If you know how to develop, if you know how to code, if you know how to do art, which I guess a lot of the conferences, a lot of the talks when it comes to indie developers, that's probably, you know, most of the tutorials or most of the time that you spend, you know, learning throughout your career. But after you've gone through them and you have your set of skills sufficiently for you to achieve the process of building a game, building cloud becomes like pretty much the biggest challenge or the key to success. Certainly there's loads of situation where you see someone who already has an IP and then starts from that IP, or they already has an audience, then build something for their own audience. You've seen influencers do that and YouTube channels do that and so on, right? It kind of makes it easier, or you at least think that it sounds easier, but then you're buying passion, basically. It comes back to the first question we were discussing. You need passion. You do need passion, or you pay for that passion by finding someone who's, you know, working and doing CG for 10, 15 years. So yeah, marketing from our perspective, at least when it comes to an original IP, becomes the kind of the thing that sucks the most money out of you and the most time and the most effort, because it's a problem that there is no fixed solution for how do you build an audience, right? There are infinite ways, and once someone does it, maybe another 2 or 3 manage to replicate that same process, but then that process becomes diluted once everyone knows what the trick was, right? That's why you can't break into YouTube anymore or into Twitch, right? It's harder now than it was 5-10 years ago. So Yeah, I would argue that marketing is where most of your effort comes after, if you know how to build stuff, so to speak, or at least in our experience.
Yeah, definitely. Jana, do you have any input on this? Like, how have you found? Obviously, you've been working with Martin, but how have you found the sort of marketing and sort of getting awareness of your game? How have you found that?
Getting awareness of your game must be the hardest thing to do, especially as we mentioned before, the fact that the market is huge and there are some great games out there that are also done by indies, and you're not just competing with indies, you're competing with everyone. And all platforms are just as competitive too, so it's really tough to get awareness of your game. But marketing, I don't think would be the hardest thing in self-publishing. There are tons of other hard things, since in self-publishing everything's on you. The funding, the development, there no one will help you with anything. So it depends on why you're making this game, your budget, your experience, and your marketing strategy. If you're making this game for like enjoying it, then you're probably going to self-publish it. But there are sometimes where you would need to share with someone some of the responsibilities, and also as you said before, that it depends on how big is your team. So if you're just two, like we are, it's really tough to make the whole game on your own. You'd need a partner in this.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what I was thinking. It's, when you look at even not just the big companies, but even the bigger indies, there's a team there and people are taking different responsibilities. But it's got to be so overwhelming, especially when you're a smaller team or you're starting out. Just all the different things that you're having to think of and juggle at the same time. I mean, Christopher, you've been going for a long time, and how have you found that evolution? Is that something that did weigh on you a lot more at the start than it does?
Like I say, we
now?
spent a lot of our time working with publishers, and in that, yeah, they do take a lot of weight off of you. Big Fish did a lot of our user acquisition for many, many years. We had a great partnership like that. So I mean, that's certainly something that can be done. I would say long term, though, I have some regrets from that, because those were a lot of years. It's interesting. There's a wonderful studio out there called Playrix. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. And the guys that run Playrix, I happen to know them. And I can remember back when we actually started our studios at about the same time. And they went the direction of, we're going to do our own marketing. We're going to put our own energy into this. They built a marketing group and they owned their customers. At the same time, we said, no, it's way easier to go with a publisher and let Big Fish do all of that. We don't have to grow a marketing team and our blah, blah, blah. And we get, here we are 15 years down the road, and Playrix is a huge company worth a lot of money, and Boomzap isn't, right? And I would argue that the biggest difference between those two studios, we both made great games in that time. We both had great staff. The big difference was they consistently thought about, how are we going to own this audience as we grow our studio? And we thought about, how are we going to make the most money right now? And we're okay with Big Fish or Gamehouse or somebody else owning our audience. In retrospect, I would go back and do that differently. And I know that it is hard. I mean, you're a small indie studio, but you think about it this way: a small indie studio doesn't say, well, there's only 3 of us, so I guess none of us code. No, you find someone in the studio who's going to code, right? At this point, I think marketing is so key to what you're doing and so key to any level of success that it might be, you need to have somebody in marketing in your studio, even as a small studio, if you want to grow that part of your studio, because so much of what modern marketing is can actually be done by you, right? People are like, oh, these publishers got us in Kotaku. Yeah, Kotaku will read your email too, right? Oh, well, this publisher has, links to these streamers. Well, yes and no, right? A lot of times when you make a brand new game, the very first thing the publisher does is go find a whole bunch of brand new streamers, because the last game they did had streamers that aren't interested in your game. right? It's very unlikely that they have the direct connection to the exact people that you want to talk to about your game. They're going to go do that work. And that's fine. Maybe that's great that they do that work, but you could do that work too. There's a lot of grassroots work that you can do in self-marketing that publishers kind of put behind a screen and, you know, blow a lot of smoke and say, oh, well, we did all of this stuff. And it is work, but a lot of that is work that you can do. I'm not saying that they don't add any value, but I'm saying if you consistently get in the habit of letting somebody else own your audience, you'll end up like us. It's a very clear story. You'll end up 15 years down the road with somebody else owning your audience. And that's not always a great long-term plan for a studio.
Yeah, I mean that's some incredible advice, and we're kind of over time already. So I wanted to just quickly, ask one final question of everyone, and I'll start with you, Mark, which is just, very quickly, do you have any kind of advice you would offer to indie developers in the audience based on your experiences? One sort of salient piece of advice that you wish you'd known, or just to bear in mind.
I guess I would just say get your game in front of as many people as possible, as early as possible, and get feedback, because often the things that you think are really good and will work really well, you find don't, and there might be things that you didn't think that much of, but actually people really love those things, so it allows you to kind of pivot early. Whereas if you wait until you feel ready and the game is polished enough to put it in front of people, then you're probably already too far along, and you'll figure out these big issues that you could have fixed earlier if you'd have just not worried so much about putting grey box stuff in front of people and things without tutorials and whatever. I think it's just good to see it in the hands of people as soon as you can.
Yeah, Liviu, anything to add?
I would echo the same thing, like as Mark and as Chris touched upon. Like, if you're working on an original IP and you want to own it, the real option, your only option, is to figure out how do you build that audience, how do you build that following behind it. You can go with a publisher, of course. There's like a million ways that you can be profitable as a game studio, but just figure out, do you want to own it, or do you want someone else to give it away? In which case, that's an option, and then find someone who's willing, who already has the audience, because otherwise, yes, basically they're spending money on building your audience, but for them.
Yeah.
So that is pretty much why we kind of still are big believers in self-publishing, just purely because at the end of the day, the efforts that anyone would make, even if it's a streamer, even if it's a collaborator or whatever, a lot of times is something that maybe not anyone can make it, but anyone could be the person that would make that audience, and it might as well be you for your own IP. At least that's how I am viewing it.
Yeah. And Jana, anything to add to that?
No, I think my advice would be the same as Mark's, because I think that self-promotion is one of the most important factors in your success. I mean, I met so many great people through events like Pocket Gamer Connects, and it has helped me to, most of the deals we got were also from connections, from events like this, or from after interviews we had with journalists from around the world. So to get your game out there is one of the most important things to do.
Yeah, and I know we sort of started with your advice, Chris, but is there anything else you'd like to add just before we finish up the panel?
I will actually say 3 short things.
Great.
I just wrote them down so I don't forget them. The biggest one that I think indies miss is be willing to admit your failure, right? And be willing to openly admit it. Tell people, like, I'll go on a panel right here and I'll tell you where my studio screwed up, because it's only through admitting to other people what you failed on that people can talk to you and offer you advice, and you can hear better ways to do it. I see way too many people hiding that failure. It doesn't help you, right? The second one is, and Jana talked about this as well, get out and interact with other developers as much as humanly possible. Go to these conventions, show up at game jams, whatever you need to do, whatever you can do to get involved with other developers. That's how you're going to learn. And the third one, and this is one I wish someone had told me earlier, is just don't be scared, right? A lot of times I see people get into bad deals because they're scared of doing something. I don't know how to do marketing, so we got a publisher to do it for us. I don't know how to talk to live streamers, so I paid someone a bunch of money to do it. Jump in and try to do stuff yourself. If it doesn't work out, great. Now you know that this is something that you're not capable of doing, and now you go hire somebody, but now you at least know enough about it that they don't screw you over. Because if you walk into something with complete ignorance and just say, I don't want to think about this because it scares me, I'll give you a bunch of money to take care of it, that person's going to take you to the cleaners, right? You need to have that knowledge to at least have enough knowledge to not get taken advantage of. And you only do that through doing it, trying it, failing it, or possibly being good at it. But just don't be scared to go out and try.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. And I've actually been given the go ahead since we're the last panel to ask the one question that came in, which, just in case anyone's got any insights briefly, is Stefan asked, question for everyone. The low barrier of entry and average revenues on Steam is dropping year on year. Is making an indie game destined to be an expensive hobby or second job for most teams, especially with the top 100 games on Steam making less than 90% of the revenues? Or I'm making, sorry, approximately 90% of the revenues. I mean, obviously that's focusing on Steam specifically, and there are other opportunities, especially in mobile and on consoles and you know, with subscription services that we didn't get to touch on. But you know, what do you think with that? Do you think that's you know, a realistic point, Liviu, I can see, or do you think that's maybe being defeatist?
I think for us, like coming from in the indie space, like only 3 years ago, right? It's very important to understand that the word indie game developer includes no budget, includes people who have 15, 20, 30 years of experience in the games industry. They just didn't grow that much, includes people who have 300 employees and they are an indie publisher or indie game developer. They will openly say, or includes someone who has millions of dollars in investment that they raised, but have never built a game. No one in their team has more than a couple of years of experience. And those that have a couple of years of experience have never like self-made anything. They were always like, you know, part of a bigger group. So, you know, that they figure out what you're looking at when you're looking at examples, when you're reading about other indie titles or indie studios. Figure out what type of indie is that. Yeah. That would be like the biggest advice from my perspective.
I think that's a really good point, is that especially on Steam, indie is quite broad, to be honest. And yeah, and there is various different ways. So I suppose, yeah, the big point is, you know, as I suppose, as we've been saying throughout the panel, is, you know, look at yourselves and what you have in your team, maybe what you need to add to your team, you know, what's your long-term plan and all those kind of things. And yeah, don't be afraid to learn from well, you know, I'm remiss to say failures, but learn from everything, the positive, the negative, and everything in between. Did anyone else have anything to add on that question though, or is it time to bring Oscar back in?
Oh, I jokingly responded in text that you should be one of the top 100 games. I should validate that response.
Yeah.
People pull this out a lot and say there's 1,000 games every week or whatever. Most of those games are garbage. I mean, that's just the honest truth. Most of those are shovelware, right? Honestly, it's not as bad as people make it out. On mobile, it's a little bit worse. On Steam, it's still reasonable. There are good games out there, but if you put the time, you put the energy, you put the thought into it, you can be a top 10% game. And as a top 10% game, maybe you're not going to make retirement levels of money, but you can make your money back in game development. You can make a career out of this. It's a very achievable dream. And I think people get really upset when they see that number and they say, oh, the top 100 games is 90% of the revenue. There's a lot of revenue on Steam, like a lot. If you're not in the top 90% of revenue, you can still make money, right? If you keep your costs low, if you're smart about things, and you're not making garbage games. So I've made plenty of crappy games that made their money, and it can be done. I wouldn't let that scare you off.
I think, actually, I don't think there's a better way to end the panel than that. You know, there's really motivational and yeah, absolutely fantastic. So let me do, Mark, did you want to say something?
Not if that was a
No,
brilliant way of ending the panel.
No, well, I just want to say, sorry, I just saw you come off mute, but it's a good chance though, because I would like to say a thank you to all four of you for being a part of this panel. I think it's been a really great panel, and hopefully it's been a great way to end the morning of Incredible Indies. So yeah, to Jana, to Liviu, to Mark, and to Chris, thank you so much for being a part of this panel with me.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's always fun.
Thank
Yeah.
you so
Thanks,
much.
Sophia. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
That was
Thank you.
awesome. Chris, I love it when you come on because we can always have a kind of a lovely row about publishers in the background, the type of way. But I mean, the irony is I kind of absolutely agree with you as well. But I mean, I think the bottom line for me is you guys have covered a whole bunch of areas. I mean, the fail fast, fail early, that use of data, that professionalism of making a game as a business, not just as a hobby, I think is absolutely critical. And Chris is absolutely right. There's so much stuff that we can do ourselves now and should. My concern, though, is that we're also going to work out what we're good at. And not everybody is good at making business models. Not everybody is good at running live ops. Not everybody is good at publishing. Now, that's not saying that you shouldn't try to learn and do what is appropriate. But I think understanding what you can do, particularly because we've got limited budgets and so on and so forth. And, I think this is a fantastically interesting market. And Chris, I think you nailed it there as well with this point about it's only really 10% of the market that is making serious games in terms of a commercial proposition, arguably. Now, that may be being a bit unfair on some of the games, but we know the difference between a game when we see it in a beginning pitch or when we see it in an app store, of the one that really understands who their audience is, why that audience cares, and why the audience will spend money, whether that's spending money up front or whether that's spending money in the game. We can tell the difference because there's a resonance to it. And that's what we as indie game developers and as professional game developers aspire to doing. We're not just making a game because this is a great idea. We're making this game because we have a stake that we can essentially make something that is going to be of merchantable quality. And I think that's a really tough one to work out. So we're in an interesting position. If we didn't have the other 90% of games, we wouldn't have the experimentation, the training, the lessons learned, the experience, the understanding, the context, where we can tell the difference between the amazing professionalism of any professional game designer, whether you're indie or whether you're AAA, and the people who are learning. And I think that's normal. That's a normal thing and a healthy thing. We're actually a terrible industry when it comes to training people up, I would argue, but I think that's really powerful. The one thing I would say is, Chris, you made a point about, and I do get why you said it, about there being no need for publishers. I think there is a bunch of people out there who do need publishers, but they need publishers who are actually going to be professional marketeers. They're actually going to be building communities. They're actually going to be people who can get in early and take a shared risk with the developer to help them make sure that when they launch their game, it is a commercial viable model. And they have to be taking a risk in doing that, or they're not worth the salt, simply put. So I'm kind of mostly with you, Chris, on that one, but I think it's worth that. And obviously, I can't say very much about that, but I might be saying something a bit more about a publisher like that at some point in the future, but I can't say anything at the moment. So anyway, on that note, I have to say thank you again, everybody. Amazing panel, really love it. And I think hopefully everybody's got some amazing stuff out of today. We had lots of information about kind of narrative and the use of narrative and telling stories through gameplay, which is, whether you're intending it or not, the player is making a story about their experience playing your game. We've talked about, the whole area around product management. I think that taps into this professionalism, the role of an executive producer, which sometimes, historically that came from good publishers. Nowadays, it tends to be that we've got to take on that responsibility ourselves, but that sometimes changes. But getting events like this where we're sharing and we're talking to each other, we're looking at best practice and we're engaging with each other. That's how we learn the lessons. That's how we keep on top of our game, and that's how we make sure our games are of merchantable quality. In other words, they're delivering amazing experiences that people are willing to pay their hard-earned cash for. And the fact that we've got, old lags like me and, greybeards who've been doing it for a long time. In fact, Chris, you've been doing it longer than me, but you're so much younger than me. No, anyway. And then, of course, we've got Jana at the other end of the scale who's just starting out. But I've known since you were 10? No, I can't remember, but you were very young when I first met you in Jordan. And the fact that you're still here and you've got 3 or 4 years of experience making games shows that there's so much potential in this space for everybody. And, that's why I love the indie track. So on that note, thank you all. Great session. Lots more coming up today and tomorrow. Essentially, I'm so grateful to our sponsors for letting us do this. And our sponsors, of course, include on the platinum level, Facebook, Mopub, and Exana. The gold sponsors are Stillfront, Google Firebase, and Luna Labs. And our silver sponsors being Unity and Adjust. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And I'm sure there's much more coming up. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks.